What if I told you what? If I told you that nearly 3,000 years ago, long before modern science, long before telescopes or satellites, ancient Egyptian scribes wrote down warnings, messages, observations, so unsettling that even today, scholars hesitate to talk about them openly? What if those texts were never meant to be myths, but records of events, beings, and cosmic cycles that we are only now beginning to understand? And what if the reason they feel frightening is because they were meant to? Because once you hear what these texts actually say, you may never look at the sky, time, or humanity the same way again. The ancient Egyptians did not believe they were inventing stories. They believed they were preserving memory. Memory of what happened before. Memory of what returns. Memory of what watches. And the deeper we go into their surviving writings, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, temple inscriptions, star charts, and forbidden fragments, the clearer it becomes that these were not simple prayers or poetic metaphors. They were instructions, observations, warnings carved into stone so they would outlast catastrophe itself. At first glance, Egyptian hieroglyphs seem symbolic, almost dreamlike. Gods with animal heads, boats sailing across the sky, a sun that dies every night and is reborn every morning. But that surface understanding is exactly what hides the deeper meaning. Because to the Egyptians, symbolism was not fiction. Symbolism was compression, a way to encode complex knowledge into images that could survive when language itself failed. And that brings us to something unsettling. The Egyptians repeatedly speak of a time before recorded history, a time they called Zep Tepi, the first time. Not a metaphorical golden age, but a literal era when the gods ruled on earth, when the boundaries between sky and land were different, when the world functioned under laws that no longer apply. And according to the texts, that time did not end peacefully. It ended in disruption, in darkness, in fire and flood. But the next part will surprise you even more, because the texts don't describe this as a one-time event. They describe it as a cycle. Again and again, inscriptions warn that when certain stars return to specific positions, when the sky tilts, when the order of math cosmic balance breaks down, the world enters a dangerous phase. Crops fail, kings fall, the gods withdraw, and something else approaches. One particular text speaks of the sky collapsing in upon itself. Another describes the sun behaving strangely, burning differently, moving wrong, becoming hostile. And in more than one inscription, there is mention of the eye watching from above, judging, measuring, waiting. This is where many scholars stop reading literally and start calling it allegory. But here's the problem. When you line these descriptions up with modern astronomical data, the coincidences become uncomfortable. Because the Egyptians were obsessed with the sky, not for astrology in the modern sense, but for survival. They tracked precession, stellar cycles that take tens of thousands of years to complete. They encoded this knowledge into temples aligned with stars that no longer rise where they once did. And they tied these movements directly to catastrophic resets of civilization. What comes next may change how you see the sky forever. Hidden within funerary texts supposedly meant only for the dead are instructions for navigating regions beyond the earth. Not spiritual metaphors, but step-by-step passages describing gates, guardians, energy fields, and zones of danger. The deceased king must pass through areas of flame, through regions where time behaves differently, through places where beings devour the unprepared. Why would a burial text need to describe hazards? Why would it warn the traveler to know the names of entities encountered? Because without that knowledge, annihilation follows. And why do these descriptions resemble, in disturbing ways, modern theories about radiation belts, wormholes, and cosmic thresholds? The Egyptians believed that the soul did not simply drift upward. It traveled, and travel implies terrain. The next revelation uncovers a secret very few people know. Some Egyptian texts were never placed in tombs. They were hidden, buried beneath temples, sealed behind false walls. And these texts speak not of the dead, but of the living. They warn that humanity forgets, that after each great collapse, survivors rebuild but lose the knowledge that once protected them. And so the same mistakes are repeated, cycle after cycle. One fragment describes humanity as the cattle of the gods, tended, watched, occasionally corrected. That phrase alone has sparked fierce debate, but the context makes it worse. Because the text continues by saying that when humans grow too numerous, too loud, too disorderly, the balance is threatened, and the gods respond, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. The text describes a decision made in the council of the sky, a judgment, a reset, and what follows is devastation so severe that only those who were hidden survived. Hidden where? The texts are frustratingly vague, unless you know what to look for. They speak of the underground place of preservation, of chambers sealed before disaster, of knowledge carried through darkness, of fire raining from the sky while the earth trembles. And here's where it becomes truly unsettling. Because some Egyptian diagrams show the earth tilted differently than it is now, not metaphorically, geometrically, which suggests that what they witnessed may not have been just floods or wars, but planetary scale events, pole shifts, solar outbursts, cosmic disturbances that modern science admits have happened, but insists are too rare to worry about. The Egyptians disagreed. They believed it would happen again. But the next part will surprise you even more. The most frightening passages are not about the past. They are about the future. Certain texts describe a time when the voice of the gods will be silent, when temples crumble not from invasion but neglect, when humanity stops listening to the sky. And in that time, the signs will return, but no one will recognize them. The sun will appear normal. Until it doesn't, the stars will shift subtly until the shift accelerates. And people will dismiss the warnings as superstition, just as we do now. One chilling line reads, "They will laugh at what was written until the fire speaks." What fire? Solar fire? Celestial fire? Something else entirely? The Egyptians never clarified. And maybe they didn't need to, because their message was not meant to be comforting. It was meant to endure. It was meant to wait. And here we are. But before you decide this is all just myth and coincidence, consider this. Why did a civilization obsessed with eternity spend so much effort warning the future? Why carve fear into stone if it was only symbolic? Why align monuments with catastrophic cycles instead of celebrating peace? And why do so many ancient cultures separated by oceans and millennia tell versions of the same story? Because as the next part reveals, Egypt was not alone in remembering what humanity keeps forgetting. Because once you begin to compare these Egyptian warnings with what other ancient cultures preserved, the pattern stops looking like coincidence and starts feeling like choreography. Across the world, civilizations that never met describe the same sequence. A sky that changes, gods who retreat, knowledge that vanishes, and a humanity that restarts confused, diminished, and unaware of how close it came to total erasure. But the Egyptians believed something even more disturbing, that memory itself is targeted, that after each cycle, it isn't just cities that are destroyed, but understanding, and that the greatest danger isn't catastrophe, it's forgetting that catastrophe is part of the design. The story only grows darker and more mysterious from here, because buried within temple inscriptions are references to what the Egyptians called the watchers who do not sleep. These were not gods in the familiar sense. They were not worshipped. They were observed. The texts describe them as beings bound to the sky, moving along fixed paths, appearing only at certain times, exerting influence without ever descending fully into the human world. They were not creators. They were regulators. And that distinction matters. Because whenever these watchers are mentioned, the tone of the texts changes. The language becomes colder, more precise, less poetic, almost technical. Measurements are given. Directions are specified. Timings are noted. The Egyptians weren't praying here. They were documenting. One passage describes a moment when the watcher turned its face away and chaos followed almost immediately. Kings lost authority. Crops failed. The Nile behaved unpredictably. The implication is chilling. Civilization itself depends on forces beyond Earth, and when those forces shift their attention or alignment, everything below destabilizes. What comes next will reveal a hidden truth you never expected. The Egyptians believed that consciousness itself is not purely human. They describe it as something received, not generated, something that flows downward, like light, from the sky to the earth. When that flow is strong, humanity thrives art, order, innovation, harmony. When it weakens, people become violent, confused, fragmented. Sound familiar? Several texts warn that during certain cosmic alignments, the mind of humanity dims. Decisions become reckless. Leaders lose wisdom. Crowds behave irrationally. And the cause is not moral failure, but interference. Something in the sky blocks or distorts the signal. This idea is terrifying because it suggests free will is conditional. And that raises an even darker question. Are we being influenced right now? But the next part will be even more shocking because the Egyptians didn't believe this influence was accidental. They believed it was part of a test. In some texts, humanity is described as being evaluated not individually, but collectively. Our ability to maintain balance, determines whether the cycle continues smoothly or resets violently. And here's the unsettling part. The gods don't intervene to save us from failure. They only record the outcome. One inscription describes scribes in the sky marking the deeds of entire eras, not people. Ages of harmony are noted briefly. Ages of chaos are described in painful detail. And when a certain threshold is crossed, the tone becomes final. The judgment is not angry. It is procedural. This is where the myth of the weighing of the heart takes on a far more ominous meaning. It wasn't just about the dead. It was about civilization itself. Humanity's heart, collectively, is weighed against truth. And if it is found wanting, the cycle does not continue. The next revelation uncovers a secret very few people know. The Great Pyramid was never meant to be a tomb. That statement alone unsettles mainstream history, but the evidence becomes harder to ignore the closer you look. The internal chambers show no signs of burial use, no inscriptions, no funerary texts. Instead, the geometry is precise beyond necessity. The alignments are exact beyond symbolism. And the materials used suggest an understanding of energy, vibration, and resonance that shouldn't have existed unless it was inherited. Some Egyptian writings hint that the pyramids were constructed using knowledge from the first time. Knowledge given, not discovered. And their purpose was not to honor the dead, but to stabilize something. What exactly? The texts use a phrase that has been deliberately mistranslated for generations. It does not mean ladder to the sky. It means anchor of heaven. An anchor doesn't help you ascend. It keeps something from drifting. The implications are staggering. What if the pyramids were designed to hold something in place? To stabilize the Earth's relationship with the sky? To mitigate the effects of cosmic cycles that would otherwise tear civilization apart? And if that's true, what happens when those systems fall into disrepair? The story only grows darker from here. Later Egyptian texts, written centuries after the pyramids were already ancient, express fear, not reverence. Priests lament that the old knowledge is lost, that rituals are being repeated without understanding, that the words remain, but the power is gone. One text openly states, "We speak the language, but the sky no longer listens." That line alone suggests a terrifying possibility. Whatever protection once existed was failing. And then the warnings intensify. The texts begin to speak of a coming age when humanity believes itself supreme, when people deny the sky entirely, when knowledge becomes fragmented, specialized, disconnected from meaning. And in that age, the signs will return, but will be misinterpreted as random events. Solar storms will be called anomalies. Seismic unrest will be called coincidence. Social collapse will be blamed on politics. And the true cause will remain invisible. What comes next may change how you see the present moment forever. One little-known inscription describes a future time when iron birds fill the sky and voices travel without mouths. Scholars laugh this off as poetic imagination. But the Egyptians weren't imagining the future. They were extrapolating patterns. They believed that technological advancement always precedes collapse, not because technology is evil, but because it creates the illusion of control. And when humans believe, they no longer need the sky. The sky reminds them otherwise. The next part will be even more unsettling, because the texts don't say this future is distant. They describe it as the time of forgetting before the return. A brief window, a calm before the correction. And here's the chilling detail most people miss. The Egyptians believed that not everyone is meant to survive the next cycle, not because of punishment, but because of resonance. Those who remain aligned with truth, with balance, with awareness, will perceive the signs. They will feel the unease before it manifests. They will sense that something is wrong long before disaster strikes. Others will feel nothing at all until it's too late. This is why knowledge was hidden. Not everyone was meant to access it at once, and that raises a disturbing question. Why are these texts resurfacing now? Why are translations accelerating? Why are patterns once dismissed as myth suddenly aligning with modern data? Because, as the next part reveals, the Egyptians believed that the knowledge would awaken itself when the cycle reached a critical point, and that those who encounter it would feel compelled to keep going, to keep searching, to keep watching, unable to look away, sensing that something enormous is unfolding just beyond the edge of understanding. And now, as everything you've heard begins to settle, every warning carved into stone, every cycle remembered and forgotten, every sign written for a future that looks hauntingly like our present, this is the moment where it all comes together. Because these ancient voices were never meant to terrify without purpose. They were meant to awaken. They were meant to shake the soul out of sleep and remind humanity that history is not random, that the heavens are not silent, and that God has always been speaking long before we learned how to listen again. From the earliest Egyptian records, we've seen a pattern emerge. Knowledge given, order established, humanity thriving under divine alignment, and then forgetting. Again and again, the texts warn that when people turn inward, when pride replaces humility, when the sky is ignored and God's order is dismissed, the world begins to fracture. Not all at once, but subtly. Minds grow restless. Hearts grow heavy. Truth becomes blurred. And the signs return just as they always have. These writings were not preserved by accident. They survived fire, flood, conquest, and time itself, because their message was meant for a moment like this, when humanity stands at the edge of knowledge, yet struggles with wisdom. When technology advances, but the soul feels emptier than ever. When people search the sky for answers, while forgetting the one who placed the stars there. What you've heard is not just history. It is not myth. It is a mirror. A reminder that God has always warned before he corrects, always called people back before judgment falls, always left witnesses etched into stone, written into scripture, carried through generations, so that no one could say, "We were not told." And here is the truth that ties it all together. Knowledge alone does not save. Awareness alone does not protect. What matters is alignment with truth, with humility, with God. That is why this moment matters. Because if you are hearing this and feeling something stir inside you, a conviction, a remembrance, a longing that is not coincidence. That is the Spirit calling you back to awareness, calling you to reflect, calling you to respond. So now, I ask you, don't let this end as just another video. Take a moment and write in the comments. Write your personal confession. Write what God has brought you through. Share a short prayer, even if it's only a sentence. Testify about what God has done in your life, because your words may be the very thing someone else needs to read to keep going, to believe again, to return to Him. And please don't keep this message to yourself. Share this video with at least 10 people or more. Family, friends, anyone you feel led to reach. Because when this message spreads, it's not algorithms that are at work. It's purpose. It's obedience. It's God's Word moving from heart to heart, waking souls, restoring awareness, and planting seeds that will grow long after this moment passes. This is not just content being shared. This is teaching being carried forward. This is truth being preserved. This is God's message continuing its journey through you. And as more souls hear, as more hearts awaken, as more voices testify, the cycle of forgetting is broken. And what comes next depends on how we respond right now.